now in about 4.5 months, I'll be going to Juneau, going to jail. Since they said, 30 days, or she goes to court too. I mean, everybody.
What if the family that said they could survive anywhere couldn't survive real life? What if the wilderness wasn't the most dangerous thing they ever faced? Because by 2026, the story of Alaskan Bush people isn't about cabins, survival, or freedom anymore. It's about a father who pushed his body too far, a family shattered by loss, children pulled into courtrooms instead of the wild, and a legacy that quietly collapsed after the cameras stopped rolling. Some members are gone forever, some are fighting charges instead of storms, and some disappeared completely, leaving fans to ask one question no one ever answered. What really happened to Billy, Amy, and the 7 kids after the survival dream ended? Before we began, hit like and subscribe. At the center of Alaskan Bush people stood one unmistakable force: Billy Brown. More than a father, more than a television personality, Billy was the architect of the entire world viewers were invited into. His voice set the tone, his rules shaped the lifestyle, his beliefs became the foundation of the family's identity. To the audience, Billy wasn't just leading his children through the wilderness, he was leading a philosophy, a rejection of modern life, authority, and dependence, replaced by grit, loyalty, and survival at all costs. That worldview didn't come from nowhere. Long before cameras followed him into Alaska, Billy's life was marked by devastating loss. As a teenager, he lost both parents and a sister in a sudden plane crash. The trauma shattered any sense of stability he had known and planted a deep distrust of systems, institutions, and normal life. From that moment on, Billy believed safety didn't come from society, it came from self-reliance. Isolation wasn't loneliness to him, it was protection. Alaska became his proving ground. The harsh land mirrored the harsh lessons he believed life demanded. Over time, survival stopped being a necessity and became an identity. Billy didn't just live in the wilderness, he built a belief system around it. He raised 7 children under that system, homeschooling them, limiting outside contact, and teaching them that struggle wasn't something to avoid, but something that made you stronger. Pain, in his eyes, was a teacher. On television, that mindset looked inspiring. A tight-knit family standing together against nature. But behind the scenes, it came with a cost. Years of physical strain, emotional pressure, and constant hardship slowly wore Billy down. By the late 2010s, his health began to decline in ways the family couldn't ignore. Fatigue, breathing problems, and weakness were brushed off at first as age or exhaustion, but in 2019, doctors delivered a far more serious warning: Billy had dangerous heart complications. Medical professionals urged him to leave high elevations and reduce physical stress. Billy refused. Leaving the bush didn't feel like a medical decision to him. It felt like surrender. Stepping away from the land meant abandoning the very principles he had built his life on. Publicly, the family respected his choice. Privately, fear set in. The man who taught them survival was becoming vulnerable, and no amount of grit could change that. And once that reality set in, everything the family depended on began to feel far less stable than it ever had before. Amber Branson was never meant to be part of the spotlight. Unlike the Brown children who grew up on camera, Amber existed just outside the main narrative of Alaskan Bush people. She wasn't portrayed as a survivalist, a risk-taker, or a personality built for television. Instead, she was known within the family as something far more subtle, a calming presence, gentle, soft-spoken, someone who brought emotional balance rather than chaos into a world that was often loud and demanding. Those close to Amber described her as deeply empathetic. She listened more than she spoke. She absorbed pain rather than projecting it. And while that sensitivity made her a source of comfort for others, it also meant she carried her own struggles quietly. For years, Amber wrestled with emotional instability and inner turmoil that few outside the family ever saw. Unlike the dangers portrayed on television storms, hunger, isolation, her battle wasn't physical. It was internal. As time passed, those struggles grew heavier. Friends later suggested she was trying to manage overwhelming emotions the only way she knew how, coping in ways that weren't healthy but felt necessary in the moment. To outsiders, there were signs of improvement. Periods where she seemed steadier, more hopeful, like she was regaining her footing. But healing is rarely a straight line, and Amber's path took a devastating turn. In 2020, emergency responders were called to her home in Texas after a fire left her with catastrophic injuries. She was discovered outside, barely alive, with burns covering most of her body. The severity of the injuries stunned medical professionals. When questioned, Amber reportedly described the incident in spiritual terms, a response that only deepened the concern surrounding her mental state leading up to that moment. Doctors made it clear that survival was unlikely. The damage was simply too extensive. For the family, the situation became unbearable. Decisions had to be made that no one is ever truly prepared for. On May 1st, 2020, Amber was taken off life support. Her passing devastated the Browns, especially Amy, who had been one of Amber's strongest emotional anchors. The loss didn't happen in front of cameras. There was no dramatic storyline, no televised goodbye. It unfolded quietly, painfully, and out of public view. And yet, it left a mark deeper than anything the wilderness had ever thrown at them. Amber's death exposed a truth the survival narrative never addressed. Strength in nature does not protect the mind. Isolation doesn't cure pain. And some of the most dangerous battles don't come with warning signs or dramatic music. They happen silently, until it's too late. And after Amber, loss was no longer an exception in the Brown family story, it was becoming a pattern. Among the Brown children, Bear Brown was always the one audiences remembered first. Loud, impulsive, fearless, and endlessly energetic, Bear embodied the wild spirit the show was built around. He charged headfirst into danger, laughed through pain, and treated the wilderness like a personal playground. To viewers, he felt untouchable, the living proof that the Brown philosophy worked. But Bear's confidence was shaped in a very specific environment. He was raised almost entirely off the grid, isolated from normal social structures most people take for granted. Schooling was unconventional. Discipline came from family hierarchy, not institutions. Conflict was handled within the family bubble, not through outside accountability. That upbringing created toughness and independence, but it also left gaps that didn't show up until adulthood. As Bear grew older, he began trying to define himself beyond the family image. Marriage and fatherhood appeared to be his turning point. With Raven Adams, Bear presented a calmer, more reflective version of himself. Social media posts showed pride, vulnerability, and a desire to build something stable. For many fans, it felt like growth, like the wild child was finally settling into responsibility. Then everything changed in March 2022. Bear was arrested near his Washington home on a domestic-related assault charge involving Raven. The news spread fast, hitting fans hard. This wasn't a wilderness mishap or reckless stunt. This was real life, with real consequences. He was taken into custody and booked into jail, a moment that shattered the playful survival image viewers had known for years. Details that followed complicated the story. Authorities later confirmed there was no evidence of substances involved and no indication of strangulation. Bear was released without bond, and in April, he accepted a plea deal that resolved the case without extended jail time. But resolution didn't mean erasure. The damage to his public image was immediate and lasting. After the arrest, Bear went quiet. The constant online presence faded. When he did speak, his tone had changed completely. Gone was the fearless bravado. In its place was restraint, reflection, and an emphasis on accountability. Fatherhood became central to his identity, not adventure. The shift was impossible to miss. For the Brown family, the timing couldn't have been worse. Billy was gone, Amber had been lost, and now one of the most visible sons was facing public scrutiny of a completely different kind. The survival narrative was being replaced by something far heavier reckoning. Bear's story forced an uncomfortable question into the spotlight. What happens when someone raised to survive nature is suddenly required to navigate modern relationships, legal systems, and emotional responsibility without a roadmap? And as Bear struggled to rebuild himself quietly, it became clear he wasn't the only Brown about to face consequences that couldn't be escaped by running deeper into the wild. If Bear represented chaos and impulse, Joshua Bam Bam Brown represented control, calm, analytical, quietly capable. On Alaskan Bush People, Bam Bam was often the one fixing what others broke. He understood wiring, tools, logistics, and planning. While the show leaned into raw wilderness drama, Bam Bam handled the details that made survival actually work. To many fans, he felt like the most grounded Brown of all. That's why what came next hit so hard. Behind the scenes, the family's off-grid image wasn't as clean as it appeared on television. Between 2011 and 2013, the Browns claimed permanent residency in Alaska to receive payments from the Alaska Permanent Fund dividend, a yearly payout reserved only for verified residents. But records later showed the family had spent extended periods living outside the state during those same years. The claims didn't match reality. In 2014, authorities stepped in. Billy Brown, Bam Bam, and several family members were charged in connection with falsified residency filings. For fans, the revelation felt like a gut punch. This wasn't a personal scandal or emotional breakdown. It was documentation, paperwork, proof that the line between the show's story and real life had blurred more than anyone realized. Bam Bam ultimately pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge related to unsworn falsification. The sentence was real, not symbolic. Jail time, fines, community service, repayment of improperly received funds, and a permanent ban from ever applying for the dividend again. There was no dramatic defense, no public outburst, no attempt to spin the story. He served his sentence quietly and stepped away from the spotlight almost entirely. That response set Bam Bam apart. While critics used the case to attack the family's credibility, Bam Bam didn't push back publicly. He didn't blame editing. He didn't accuse the system. He accepted responsibility and disappeared from the narrative. In the years that followed, he focused on private work, technical projects, and a life far removed from reality television. Occasional glimpses surfaced through photography, fishing, and behind-the-scenes technical interests, but the attention-seeking was gone. Still, the damage couldn't be undone. The fraud case became a turning point for the entire show. It raised questions viewers couldn't ignore anymore. If the residency claims weren't true, what else had been exaggerated? How much of the survival story was belief, and how much was branding? For the Brown family, Bam Bam's conviction quietly undermined the foundation of their image, not through drama, but through facts. And sometimes, facts hit harder than any scandal. Because once the illusion cracked, it didn't just affect Bam Bam. It forced fans to re-examine everything they thought they knew about the Browns, and it opened the door to an even more explosive controversy involving the youngest member of the family. Of all the Brown children, Rain Brown was always the most difficult to place into the survival mold. As the youngest, she grew up almost entirely in front of cameras, transitioning from a quiet, wide-eyed child into a young adult under constant public observation. While her siblings leaned into toughness and physical endurance, Rain gravitated towards something far more internal: poetry, faith, self-expression, emotional openness. That contrast made her relatable to some viewers and deeply polarizing to others. As she got older, Rain began using social media as a kind of outlet. Her posts were raw, spiritual, and intensely personal. She spoke about love, pain, identity, and self-worth in ways that felt unfiltered. Supporters saw honesty and vulnerability. Critics saw instability and oversharing. Either way, Rain became one of the most closely watched members of the family, especially as she started pulling away from the traditional Bush lifestyle. That distance grew when she met Josiah Lorton, a professional chef she connected with outside the family's survival bubble. Their relationship moved quickly, and Rain framed it as a safe place, a partnership built on understanding and emotional support rather than wilderness toughness. When they married, many fans viewed it as Rain finally choosing her own path. A fresh start, a life beyond the weight of the family myth. Then came the arrest. In a case that blindsided fans and fractured the family's already fragile image, Rain and Josiah were taken into custody in connection with a high-value burglary involving Josiah's uncle in Washington state. According to court records, they were accused of taking large sums of cash, gold, expensive alcohol, firearms, and other valuables from a rental property they had access to. The charges were severe, including first-degree burglary and malicious mischief, with Rain also facing an additional trespass-related charge. Investigators alleged that surveillance footage placed the couple at the property around the time the items disappeared, and that some of the missing property was later linked back to them. Both were booked into jail and held for several days before being released. At their arraignment, they pleaded not guilty, setting the stage for a long and uncertain legal battle. Rain's response was not a traditional statement. Instead, she turned inward and online. Cryptic posts appeared referencing judgment, betrayal, and faith. Bible verses replaced explanations. She suggested that not everything had been taken in the way people assumed, hinting at emotional loss rather than material guilt. The ambiguity divided audiences instantly. Some saw a young woman overwhelmed and afraid. Others saw avoidance. By 2026, the case remains unresolved, leaving Rain suspended in legal limbo. Any chance at a public comeback, media work, or clean reset has been put on hold. The emotional cost is impossible to ignore. The youngest Brown, once seen as the heart and innocence of the family, is now facing consequences that could permanently reshape her future. Rain's story marks a breaking point in the Brown narrative. It's where youth, love, trust, and legality collide not in the wilderness, but in courtrooms and headlines. And it reinforces a hard truth the show never prepared anyone for. Leaving the bush doesn't mean leaving danger behind. Sometimes, it just changes its form. By 2026, the Brown family no longer moves as a single unit. The years following Billy's death have pushed each remaining member in different directions, revealing who chose stability, who remains stuck in old patterns, and who is still quietly fighting battles the cameras never captured. Gabe Brown has become the clearest example of someone deliberately stepping away from the chaos. Once known for his practical skills and steady presence on the show, Gabe has shifted almost entirely toward family life. He and his wife Raquel have focused on raising their children, keeping their world small and controlled. His public presence is minimal, and when he does appear, it's centered on fatherhood, gratitude, and routine. No controversy, no cryptic posts. Just a conscious effort to build a normal life, far removed from the Brown family spectacle. To many longtime viewers, Gabe represents what the Browns were always searching for: peace without performance. Matt Brown, the eldest son, remains the most complicated and least understood figure in the family by 2026. Once positioned as a natural leader, Matt has lived largely outside the family circle for years. His struggles with addiction and strained relationships were never fully resolved on camera, and that distance never fully closed. While he maintains contact at times, Matt continues to live largely independently, avoiding public family narratives. His absence fuels speculation, but it also reflects something deeper: a man who never fully fit into the survival myth and paid the price for it early. Snowbird Brown has taken one of the quietest yet most intentional paths. Known for her introspective nature even as a child, Snowbird has leaned away from both controversy and attention. By 2026, her life centers on reflection, creativity, faith, and personal growth. She shares selectively, carefully, and without inviting debate. Unlike others who struggled to redefine themselves after the show, Snowbird appears to be doing exactly that, not rejecting her upbringing, but no longer letting it define her. Her journey feels less about escape and more about balance. At the heart of everything remains Amber Brown. By 2026, she carries the weight of both grief and responsibility. Health concerns have periodically pulled her out of public view, reminding fans that the emotional toll of the past decade hasn't faded. Beyond that, Ami has had to navigate legal and financial pressures tied to Billy's legacy contracts, obligations, and unresolved disputes that followed his passing. She rarely speaks directly about these struggles, choosing instead to focus publicly on faith, resilience, and holding her family together. But the strain is visible. Leading without Billy was never part of the plan. Together, these updates paint a different picture than the one viewers were once sold. There is no unified survival mission anymore. No single philosophy guiding every decision. Instead, there are individuals, parents, siblings, survivors, each trying to make sense of a life that was shaped by isolation, fame, and loss. By 2026, the Browns aren't defined by cabins or wilderness challenges. They're defined by adaptation. Some found stability, some remain fractured, some disappeared from the story entirely. And that may be the most honest ending the Alaskan Bush People saga could ever have, not a triumph or a failure, but a family learning, imperfectly, how to live once survival stopped being a show and became real life.